Hey everyone, Thyworm here. I've put a lot of hours into the Monolith of Fate and it is time to give it a proper review. If you enjoy Last Epoch, consider subscribing. I am making a lot of videos about this game. I cover the news and the occasional build guide even. Subbing helps me out a lot really, so thanks. Let's just get right into it. The new endgame. How is it? How does it play? How is the Shade of Orbis? First, a little recap maybe. The Monolith of Fate before this patch was a rather linear affair. You had to complete a timeline by completing several echoes in that timeline, which are basically maps, and your choices were very limited. There were just two choices to choose from. Sometimes you would encounter a quest echo, and after completing 3 quest echoes, you would conquer the timeline and unlock the next timeline. The new Monolith of Fate has removed that linearity and gave the players a lot of control on how you complete each timeline. Completion still unlocks the next timeline, but the way you complete timelines has drastically changed. A timeline in this patch basically consists of a web of echoes. You start at the center and can branch out however you wish. Each echo you see in this web has its own rewards, its own enemy modifiers, and you will quickly realize which echoes you want to run and which ones you don't. This change, creating a web of echoes, has done a lot for endgame honestly. After playing only a few hours, you may not realize yet how intricate this system really is or can be. I've spent around 30 to 40 hours so far, farming several timelines, both regular ones but also a lot of empowered ones. I noticed a big difference in regular and empowered timelines by the way, which I'll talk about near the end of the video. The more you play, the more you realize how you can influence the web in order to get the most out of it. This to me is a hallmark of something good, of a well-designed system. The more time you spend in it, the more you discover and learn how to manipulate the system to your advantage. I already made a small video on having an easy time completing quest echoes, but target farming, cranking up modifiers and loot multipliers, and going ham on echoes with exalted rewards is really fun to do as well. It's what I've been doing mostly on my rogue. A few systems come into play, all at the same time. You want to keep track of the enemy modifiers because it can get pretty nuts out there. You want to keep track of corruption as well, which is a new modifier that increases loot and rarity and zone level, but also makes enemies more tankier and more dangerous. And you want to keep track of your timeline stability, at least if you want to run the quest echoes. You don't want to fight the Emperor of Corpses, maybe, on your level 75 Primalist with a few crows and 5 enemy modifiers. Completing all 3 quest echoes resets the web by the way, so maybe you want to kill the Shade of Orbis first, which also resets the web before you take on the Emperor. There is a lot to take into account, and playing around at all of the different systems the new Monolith offers is great. Especially on the empowered timelines, I found myself planning out a route, coming up with a strategy in order to fully maximize my currently available echoes without racking up too many modifiers I can't handle. Each time you have completed an echo, there are now 2 rewards. There's the old chests, which contained loot based on how many monsters you killed in the echo, and there's the golden crystal, which contains the reward as was indicated in the web. This is the juicy part. Opening up these 2 containers after an echo doesn't really get old, and I just want to give props on the implementation here. There's this sense of actual reward after every echo, and that is extremely important. It's basically rewarding enough by itself, by just completing echoes. Even if you aren't focused on the timeline or the web progression or anything else the new Monolith offers, this small gameplay loop is still a lot of fun. Honestly, just excellent stuff here. A small note on dying. Don't die, that's one thing, but if you do, in-game preferably, it's not as punishing anymore. You lost the echo reward, which can suck, sure, but I feel that is fair actually, and you lose some timeline stability. But you only lose this once per echo, meaning you can infinitely try an echo over and over again, like the Shade of Orbis for example, without losing timeline stability over and over again. You just lose it once, the first time. I really appreciated that implementation and feel that it's a decent balance between punishment and incentive. You're not just going YOLO into an echo for which you really want the reward. No. You would plan that out a little bit, so you don't give the enemies 300% damage, but rather a few more manageable modifiers. It's strategic, fun, and requires some thinking, or a broken build, I suppose. Back to the echoes. The majority of the echoes you run are regular echoes, but there are a few special ones as well. The Arena Echo, for example, which has you surviving 12 to 18 rounds of Arena. It's a nice mix-up. Or the Beacon Echo, which lets you see a much larger part of the web. There's a Chaos Echo as well, which rerolls all unfinished echoes and changes all their rewards, which is great. It basically turns all the rewards you didn't want into something potentially useful. In empowered timelines, this is a very powerful thing to do because exalted, unique and set rewards are rather common. There's a Memory Echo, which resets all the echoes, but not the entire web, meaning that you can run all of the echoes again, including their rewards. This one is extremely rare. I haven't encountered a single one in 40 hours. And then there's the Shade of Orobis Echo, which spawns a completely new boss. The Shade comes in many different versions: Shock, Frost, Fire, Void, etc. Depending on his form, he uses various abilities. It's a lot of fun, honestly, because you never really know what he's about to throw at you, sometimes quite literally. The arena that you fight him in is rather small, making the fight more difficult as well. Depending on how much corruption you got in your web, he changes his rewards too. So far, I've got a lot of rings and a few pairs of boots. I play at 126 corruption currently, because I found that getting your corruption up isn't all that easy actually. You see, corruption increases because you kill the Shade of Orobis, but what happens then is that the game seems to remember where you killed him. I mean, how far away from the center you killed him. Every time you kill the Shade, the map resets, meaning you need to explore again. And at some point you encounter the Shade again, but if the encounter is closer to the center than previously and you kill the Shade, you don't gain corruption, but you remove corruption instead. In order to increase and keep increasing corruption, you need to travel further and further away from the center. This is very confusing and a somewhat convoluted system, honestly. It also doesn't really make any sense. Why would killing the Shade give you corruption the first couple of times, but then you kill him 2 more times and now it removes corruption? It's the exact same fight. Also, thematically, it should be one or the other. Because either you kill him, which actually doesn't happen because he escapes in a portal like the Shaper, and by escaping he creates more corruption, or he is the source of corruption and by destroying him you reduce corruption. You can't have both. The current duality doesn't really work, it's confusing and I don't see why it is there. I would prefer to just have another separate system with its own echo to remove corruption, and I'll do a suggestion for that soon. This way there's a clear distinction as well between gaining and losing corruption. It's a minor thing though. Overall, the Shade is very well implemented. It's a great fight, the rewards are interesting, and so far each encounter has been very exciting, which is true for the entire web of echoes basically, or the core of the Monolith of Fate. Overall, the system, the strategy this brings, the player choice, the exploration, and the feeling of progressing your web are very, very well done. What is not so well done, at least in my opinion, are the echoes themselves. It's a rather stark contrast actually. I am being maybe rather factual about the whole monolith because I want to give you a condensed and decent overview, but I can't overstate how much of an improvement this new monolith is and how much fun it is to explore the web. Every time I load into an echo, however, I am on autopilot again. I'm gonna play a clip in the background where you see how you are running echoes these days, and nothing has really changed compared to the previous patch. The devs stated they wanted to get rid of autopilot, but they didn't succeed, because by far most echoes are still your regular echoes and all you're doing is load in, running to the objective, killing it, portal out, and collect the rewards. Yes, they did add new stuff in what I refer to as regular echoes, but it doesn't change anything really. Don't get me wrong, I think it's cool that there are more spires and that the altars have been changed for time gates that look like they're straight from Stargate, but it's like getting a root canal from a pretty dentist rather than an ugly one. Regular echoes look a bit prettier, sure, but it still hurts. That's because the main issues within these echoes aren't solved, and the main issue is a lack of variety. Echoes are still static maps with very limited options for objectives. They're maps I've run 1,000 times by now, that I can draw for you in paint, including chests and possible objective spawns, and there's just not enough interesting stuff happening in these echoes. It really doesn't matter that your objective is sometimes stationary and sometimes a patrol and sometimes a mini-boss. It's pretty much irrelevant, because all you do is following an arrow, going there, killing something and return. I find this a very boring gameplay loop. If you hoped that the patch changed this, then I have some bad news for you, because it hasn't. If this didn't bother you before, or not yet, then you're all good, because it's important to realize that I have 1000 hours into this game, and I'm sure if you've played the endgame for 100 or maybe 200 hours, you will not notice this yet. But in time, you might. There's a rather easy solution, of course, and that is to simply create more variation in the static maps, which I'm pretty sure will happen. The new Monolith is a very modular system now. You can just add a bunch of new echoes to mix it up. The Chaos and Beacon Echo are already a step in the right direction, I feel. Besides being functional and impacting the map, they also offer a little bit of variety, because you're clearly doing something else in the map itself. If we get 10 or so more of those over time and just less and less of the regular boring echoes, it's probably going to be fine and not an issue in like 6 months, let's say. Ideally, they make randomized maps, because that would just inherently bring variation and really kill that autopilot feel, which is mostly there because I know exactly what the map looks like. You can never get rid of autopilot if you don't change the tracks every now and then. I also feel the corruption system, which I touched on, could be used for some variety here perhaps. Currently, corruption is simply a modifier, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what if corruption would actually spawn completely new echoes, new echo types? In a reply to McFluffin, check out his channel by the way and his Twitch, because he's doing a good job explaining the game. I mentioned it would be cool if you would spawn some sort of corrupted altar or corrupted forge or something, which then would give you a single guaranteed +1 craft. It would let you craft above tier 5 as well. Maybe reduce corruption by a certain amount to get rid of that weird mechanic we have now. Put an interesting boss in front of it, maybe a blacksmith mini boss. Set a spawn rate and corruption threshold of 150 or 200 corruption, and you've spiced up the monolith quite a bit. Incorporated crafting, given players a reason to keep corrupting their web, is just a thought. And since we're on the track of doing suggestions, something I would love to see in the Monolith of Fate is a search function. The web can get pretty massive, a little comparable to Delve in Path of Exile, where you also have nodes and rewards. In Delve, you can search specific nodes, which then light up. I would really love to see something like that in the Monolith of Fate as well, so you can search for exalted echoes while zoomed out. Because right now it's honestly a little bit hard to see. The final thing I wanted to comment about on the Monolith of Fate is the difference in regular and empowered timelines. I leveled a primalist from scratch and had to do all the monolith again for that reason. When arriving fresh into the monolith, the first couple of timelines are pretty fun. As you progress, however, the timeline stability milestones, let's say, by which I mean how much stability is required in order to run the quest echoes, is getting a little crazy honestly. After doing 5 or 6 timelines and killing the Emperor of Corpses, I started the Fire timeline and was so demotivated that I didn't complete it. Still haven't, by the way. I later discovered why it is just not that fun, and that's because the reward structure really isn't there in regular timelines. In regular, non-empowered timelines, the more interesting echoes are extremely rare. You hardly ever find unique echoes, set item echoes, exalted item echoes. That whole part of the monolith doesn't play a major role. That really only pops off in empowered timelines, meaning that in the regular ones you're kinda missing out on a lot of reasons to actually farm. The Shade of Orobis is rather rare as well, and while corruption is okay, adding 4 corruption in a regular timeline just isn't doing all that much. Add to this the fact you need a lot of timeline stability to get to the final quest echoes, and that you don't gain much timeline stability at all, and it resulted in me being demotivated and not really wanted to continue grinding this thing. You want to progress the timelines and unlock the new empowered ones, but it takes ages. I would love to see either more rewards on the way to make it more bearable and more interesting echoes, also on lower level timelines, or a drastic reduction in stability requirements, so it is not such a grind, but you can somewhat smoothly progress through the timelines. There's no reason to drag out this experience anymore, because there is an actual scaling endgame now, and I feel the road to empowered timelines should be a lot faster than it is now. All the timelines are mandatory as well, which clearly doesn't help here, right? Even if your character is equipped well, you still need to go through the motions of clearing every timeline, which is really cool the first few times, but after 5 characters, not so much. And if players choose to remain in regular timelines and corrupting it, that is still totally possible, even with lowered requirements for stability. I really don't see any drawbacks in making this a little bit easier now that we have such a cool endgame system to get to. So let's wrap it up and draw some conclusions. I'm sometimes critical of this game because I want this game to be good, because the game is in early access, meaning it is or should be looking for feedback, and I'm just not much of a forum person. I make videos, that's what I do, and the devs watch these videos, so the system works pretty well, I would say. With that in mind, I can't state enough how much of an upgrade this new Monolith of Fate is. For the first time in a couple of patches, I had a really easy and fun time grinding it out and playing the hours I feel I require in order to write a decent script and make a decent video. Around 40 hours usually, and also this time. And I won't stop playing either. I feel there is still more to discover in the Monolith, still more strategies to explore. It's a great implementation that will serve as a strong foundation for future content. I'm convinced that in 6 to 12 months, this is going to be a very fleshed out system that can seriously compete with endgame systems of established action RPGs out there. The current content of the Monolith for me is still problematic, by which I mean the echoes. That should be a matter of time, however, before more variety gets added, more maps, and who knows, maybe even randomized maps. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you're enjoying endgame as well in the comments down below. And for now, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Love you all. Bye bye.